HaShoah to come together to remember those lost and honor our survivors. I'm Iris Lindenbaum, a member of the FOBS board, also known as Sam and Stella Skura, Moshe Lifshitz of blessed memory, and Cheryl Lifshitz's Kinda. While the founding date of FOBS is unclear, we have found documents as far back as 1917. Originally, FOBS was created by a group of immigrants from Bendin-Sosnowicer to help adapt to a new life in America. Members assisted with housing, jobs, and provided a community. After World War II, many Holocaust survivors came to the US. Those members, our parents and our grandparents, were seeking something new from FOBS. They came together in fellowship to speak a common language of memories of life before and during the war. Monthly meetings were a social and special bond that formed for all of them. Now, FOBS is comprised of first, second, third, as well as fourth generations of survivors. Our focus has shifted from a social organization to one of education. We have 2 annual meetings as well as a Yizkor service between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to ensure that our legacy is preserved. If you'd like more information about us, you can visit our Facebook page or email us at fobs18@gmail.com. I will also put our email address in the chat so you have it. It is my privilege to present Jerry Zaks today. Jerry is an FOBS member and the son of Saul and Bertha Zaks. In 1980, Jerry audio taped his parents' story. After a successful career in IT, Jerry retired in 2016 and focused on filling in the gaps from the stories that his parents passed on. As this is a daunting process for many of us, Jerry has completed and will conduct a presentation on how to research one's family in the Holocaust. During the presentation, we ask that you keep yourself on mute. Please put any questions in the chat function, and after the presentation, we'll provide time for Q&A. Well, I will read the questions and Jerry will answer them. It is my honor to introduce Jerry.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone here. I'm going to take a moment, and no offense, I'm going to mute everybody. Please try to keep yourself muted. It's amazing how little sounds can be distracting. And now I'll share my screen and we'll get started. So this, we're getting together to try to keep the memory of the Shoah alive and celebrate not celebrate, but to honor Yom HaShoah and the memory of the 6 million. The presentation, as I was introduced, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, is that I am a 2nd generation survivor. My parents were members of FOBS, Saul Zaks and Bertha Zaks. And as was mentioned, back in 1980, I recorded my parents. I did my own interview after reading Helena Epstein's book, Children of the Holocaust. And I have 2 hours of audio recording, which I've transcribed, and I have actually donated to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. You can find it there, as well as the full transcript of it. But in 1916, when I retired, I did the transcript and I realized that I had a whole bunch of facts, but I didn't have the story. I didn't know how many things got pieced together. And I started a concerted effort to do research. And after 3.5, 4 years, I certainly never will think of myself as an expert, but I've learned some tricks and some tips that I hope will help everyone here to try to find the fate of their own family during the Shoah. So this is not a talk about my parents' experiences. This is how you yourself can do the research. What we'll be talking about today is available sources and search techniques of how to find the information, how to interpret that research, how to use the internet effectively, website interaction and some social media, and we'll summarize with some basic things to keep in mind when you're doing this work. The big thing that dawns everybody when they start this is where in heaven's name to start. I will tell you that there are dozens and dozens and dozens of different online websites and personal locations that you can go to do research. And we'll go through many of them. The one, however, that stands out, the one that I judge is the most complete, and the one that I personally have had the most luck with is Arolsen Archives. Arolsen Archives is the International Center on Nazi Persecution, and it is what resulted from the International Tracing Service. During the war and predominantly after the war, the International Tracing Service was formed to help refugees register themselves, to find their relatives, to find their family, to allow their relatives and their family to find them, and to start the process of doing reparations against Germany. Over the years, relatively recently, a number of years ago, it changed its name to Arolsen Archives. It's still known as the International Tracing Service in many countries. One of the things that you learn in doing this research is Germany was obsessed with documenting their actions. There has been no genocide in the history of the world which has been documented as thoroughly and as completely as the Holocaust. The International Tracing Service and Arolsen Archive now contains over 30 million original documents, and it covers over 17.5 million people. And they have an extensive website for you to do research from. So the way we're going to conduct this, this talk today is I'm actually just going to dive into doing research, and I'm going to use my father as an example. And we're going to walk through it and see what some of the things I can find. More importantly, we're going to see some of the roadblocks and some of the problems that occur and how to fix those problems, how to resolve them. So you start with Arolsen Archives, you go to their main website, you hit this little search area up here, and we'll go through the other icons and pull downs in a little while. But you go to the main search window and you type in something to search for. Now, we all have tons of facts to use, lots of pieces of information, what town our relatives were born in, maybe what camps they were in. But a common piece of information, which we all have, is simply their name. And you'll be amazed at what you can find just by putting in their name. So when you go to this Arolsen Archives search window, I simply start by typing in my father's name, Saul Zaks, up here in the upper left-hand corner. You hit the search button, and in a few moments, the Arolsen Archives will list these records. Everything comes up as what they term as records. In the case of my father, they find 4 records. Sometimes you'll find none, sometimes you'll find 100, right? In my father's case, I find 4 records. Each one of these records is a grouping of information in the Arolsen Archives. So any one of these records can contain one or more different documents. When you have this display over here on the left and you click on any one of these lines, it'll turn this turquoise color, and the right side of the screen changes to tell you what that record is all about. In this case, the very first record, Saul Joseph Zaks, my father, is his correct birthday. And it says that this record is a whole bunch of records, a bunch of files for individual males from concentration camp Buchenwald. And in this case, this one record contains 18 different images. These other records, just to show you the types of things you can find, the second one is a record of his registering in a displaced persons camp. And the other 2 are copies of the ship manifest when he emigrated to the United States. But let's concentrate on the one from Buchenwald. Now you'll notice this scroll bar here is a little bit short, and this is cut off on the bottom. That's because there's a lot of information here. It starts with the name of this record, and it gives you a basic description of what this record is all about. And on the next slide, what we're simply going to do is scroll this left side, this right side of the screen up. And you'll see here that there are like 12 different images here. It continues down if you scroll further. There are 18 total. By default, this website selects the first one and displays a larger picture of it. So the first thing, this is the very, very first record I ever find of my father. And I can see that that's his name, that's his birthday. The town that he was born from is Benzenberg, which is German for Bendin. And it's from Buchenwald. And that's it. That's all I can figure out about this record, right? Everything else is in German. I don't know what this record is. I don't know what it means. I don't know how it's used. So how do I start going about figuring that out? Well, I'm going to tell you about the first really amazing website that I've discovered, and it will tell you about these different documents that you find throughout your searches. What you need to do, remember what it looks like, okay? And you then go to this website. This website is also on the Arolsen Archives. It's called their e-guide, and this is the URL address if you want to get to this webpage. This e-guide is 108 different German documents that were used throughout the Holocaust. And you simply scroll through it looking for a document that looks like the one that you're trying to find. And in this case, if you scroll down, I find this one here, and this is almost an exact copy of the one I'm looking for. If you hover your cursor over it, it turns dark, and in white letters, it gives you the name of that document. ITS for International Tracing Service Individual Document Envelope. And if you actually click on it, the web page itself changes to this. It shows you a picture of that document, and in many cases, it'll give you further examples of the document, and it gives you a detailed description of what that document is, how it was used, when it was used. I still want to know more though, like what are all these fields and what are these numbers? As you have it in this mode, you can move your cursor around this document and certain areas will highlight, right? And in this area, and in this case, this little number will highlight and it turns this darker color. And then if you click on it, the right side changes to no longer be a description of the entire document. Now it's a description of this specific field. And you can go all over this document and find the definitions of each one of these different fields. So in this case, what we find is this is an individual document envelope. This is a document, this is an envelope which simply is used by the International Tracing Service to store other documents. In this case, this person, the sample that the Arolsen Archives uses, this person is from Dachau. In my father's case, it was from Buchenwald, and there were these numbers that are checked off that tells the person what other documents are inside this envelope. So this itself is just an envelope. It has my father's name, it has his birthday, but it really doesn't tell me a lot of his story. Which leads me to a concept that I want to talk about for just a moment. In my 4 years of research, and this is all my personal opinion, I want to distinguish pure fact and what's real and my opinion from how I've gone about this work. I've come up with this feeling of all the documents that I've gone through, that they have different levels of importance, right? And again, this is just my opinion. The least level of importance are documents from the International Tracing Service. These are usually cross-reference documentation and organizational info, like in the case of my father's envelope, right, which doesn't tell me much about his story itself, right? In this case, this is an ITS document for my mother, which has some information on it, and it has, most importantly, the International Tracing Service reference number. So everything about my mother will have this number, everything about my father will have this number. The issue is this is not done during the war. This is not done by my parents. This is someone after the fact in the International Tracing Service organizing the information. The middle level of importance, I judge, are documents that came from the displaced persons camp. These are documents that were made by someone else from interviewing the prisoner, from interviewing the refugee, from interviewing my parents. So these are memories, right? Things that either happened a month earlier or up to 4 years earlier. And God bless them all. Maybe their memories aren't perfect. Maybe they gave some information, but it wasn't complete. These are storytellings. And you know, the old child game of playing telephone, things change over time. So this is middle importance. This is direct information from my parents, so it's pretty important, but it's still after the fact. Finally, in my opinion, the highest level of importance are actual Nazi documents. These are made at the time of the war in the concentration camps. In some cases, as in this case with this green one here, actually signed by my father. These are documents that says someone entered a concentration camp, somebody was deported, left a concentration camp, somebody went on a death march, somebody entered the hospital. Okay, so these actually happened at the time, and you really can't argue the facts and the dates that you find on these documents. So with that in mind, I found that this document is an envelope. Let's move on. Now, I've gone through all 18 of these documents. I know what every single one of them does, what it means, and what information it gave me. But let's take another good example. So in this case, we go back to that search result, and I click on this one. It gets highlighted with this border, and as I mentioned, it gets displayed larger in this top area. And again, you can print it and rotate it and zoom in and zoom out. So here's another document. It's mostly in German. Sure, I can see my father's name, and I can see his signature. I can see his birthday. But again, I want to know what this document is, what it means, and how it was used. Now, I want to say that e-guide with all of the descriptions and all of the pictures of the documents, I find that amazing. It has been incredibly helpful. I have found most of the documents I've ever examined in that mechanism to learn more about the documents, but it is not 100% perfect. And this is an example of a document which is not in that e-guide. And I found that this document is used a lot. I'm surprised it's not there, but this is not in that e-guide. So what do I do? What do you do? What do you do to now try and interpret this a bit more, since it's all in German and I can only understand some of the things like his name? And this is where I got a little verblungent a little earlier. So I want to show you about another website where we will be able to interpret this document and translate it. One of the biggest things you find is all of these documents you're going to find are in German. And I don't speak German, so how do I translate a document? Again, this is the part where I want to say, I don't want to turn this into a computer program course, but you want to copy this document, right, the image, into what's known as your paste buffer on your computer, because you're going to bring it over to another website. So on this computer, on my computer, which is a Mac, an Apple computer, you hit the button, you get a pop-up menu, you say copy image. This is on all Windows computers, it's everywhere. So you get a copy of this image in your computer, and you move to this next website I want to tell you about. This website is from a company called Yandex. They are a communications marketing firm, and they have this free website that you can use that will translate any language into any other language. The first thing on top is you see these 4 little control buttons. Text, site, document, and image. Text gives you a way to simply type in text or to paste text so that it can get translated. Site will translate a website. Document translates PDF documents. I've never needed those two. But this last one is the most amazing one and is the most helpful one. This is image. And when you click on image, the screen looks like this. You get a blank area. And what you want to do now is paste that document from the Arlson archives into this document, okay? This web page will think for a minute or two, and then it will display the document, and I hope you can see it. I tried to tweak the image so that it's a little bit more visible, but you can see that many areas on this document are now highlighted in this yellow color, right? They got a little yellow background. That means that this website has made a determination that it can make an attempt to translate this, to translate this field. Now, again, it's not perfect. It does not do handwriting very well, so it's certainly not going to translate my father's signature. And because this Gross Rosen here is on an angle, it is going to have a difficult time translating that because it's on an angle here. And it's also not perfect because it's going to try and translate a semicolon up here, just a semicolon. Well, guess what? When it translates a semicolon, it turns into a semicolon. But what you do now is you move your cursor over each one of these yellow areas one at a time, and it will actually draw a white box directly on the image on your computer and change it to the language that you've specified. This here, what I've done is I've simply displayed all of the ones that I've searched for so you can look at them. Be clear that as you do it, it really only does one at a time. You click on one, you can see that the German meant profession. You click on another one, profession goes away, and the next one shows up. So I can begin to understand what's going on here. Profession is Fleischer, that's German for butcher. My father was a butcher. This says name of parents, name of wife, he wasn't married at the time. Number of children is a dash, he wasn't married at the time. Contagious disease or infirmary is a blank line, so he wasn't sick at the time. So this starts to really give you a feel for what this document is all about, and it's a way to translate German into English or any language into any other language. I want to stop here for a moment, although I know that this is a training session. I'm sorry. And I want to go into some of the fields that aren't highlighted, right? Now, you'll notice that the main title of this entire document isn't highlighted, which is disappointing, right? And this one here is highlighted, but when I select that, GEF-NR gets translated to GEFNR, because you find that on many, many of these documents, what you have are abbreviations, and no translator can translate an abbreviation. What do you do? That we go back to that translate web page, and instead of doing the image one, you're going to select the text one, right? And then you get these two boxes here. You place what you want to translate in the left box, and it will translate it into the second box. So I actually can go here, and since this title is so clear, I can simply type it in. These little titles up here, German and English, you click on them, and it gives you a pull-down menu of all of the different languages it can handle. So you tell it on the left side what language you want to treat what you typed in as, and on the right side, you tell it the target language you want to translate it into. And in this case, that title gets translated to concentration, and in the full dictionary description of it, you know, in most dictionaries, there's different ways to interpret it. And number one is concentration, number two is concentration camp. So this document is something to do with a concentration camp. You type in GEFNR to this translate program, and again, you get nothing. You get GEFNR because it's an abbreviation. How do you handle that? I want to tell you about another web page that I found. This is actually available on the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, right? And this is a free service. It's a document. It's a single document. It's 300 pages long of German terms and abbreviations, and it's all in alphabetical order. So it's on your web, it's on your screen. You can search to find something specifically, or you can just scan down because it's all in alphabetical order. It's very easy to find anything. So just for curiosity, I actually looked for this name, and sure enough, it's in this glossary, and its translation in the glossary is concentration camp. More reinforcement that this translation worked fine. And now I can look up GEFNR, and GEFNR is found in this glossary, as were many other abbreviations throughout my research. And GEFNR is translated to prisoner number. So now it means that his prisoner number was 124560, which, to be honest, is confusing to me because I know that he was tattooed in Blechheimer with 179085, which is written up here. And Blechheimer was a subcamp of Auschwitz. So AU 179085. But here is a different prisoner number. I actually wrote an email to the archives at concentration camp Gross Rosen. They have their own archive there and their own museum. I wrote an email to them. They got back to me and explained that in many cases, when a prisoner moved from camp to camp, he was assigned another number. So I want to just take a moment now, and I know this is a research talk, but I just want to talk about this document. This is one of the more amazing documents that I've ever found, and all of them are interesting, but this one was amazing. After fully analyzing this and understanding what the numbers mean, I realized that this is a transfer document from Gross Rosen to Buchenwald. It has his birthday. It has that he was in Bendin. It actually has his street address here. This is his number from Auschwitz. This is the new number he got when he was transferred into Buchenwald. One of the more amazing things here is when I translate this name, this item, it says a name of parents. So I understand that this is father, who was Herschel Zachs and was a butcher also. And my grandmother's name was Friedla Zachs. Her maiden name was Jakobowicz. And this is the first and only documentation I've ever gotten from a concentration camp at the time that actually says that they were in concentration camp Birkenau. An interesting thing about this is that it actually is signed by my father. And it says that he left Gross Rosen on February 9th and arrived in Buchenwald on February 9th. We'll go over those two dates in a little while and we'll see how they have meaning. But this was an amazing document to find because it has my grandparents and it has his address, it has both his numbers. It was really wild when I found this one. I want to go off to this moment and talk about search techniques. So far, I've been using Arolsen Archives with just the name of my father. But every time you go to any one of these search websites, you can find lots of different ways to do your search. Here are 4 examples from Arolsen Archive, Ancestry.com, JRI Poland, Jewish Records Indexing, and Jewish Gen. I've had a lot of luck with all 4 of these and others. But whenever you do any type of research and searching on these websites online, you always have to keep in mind that you can search for data types and search types. And what do I mean by that? So far, I've only used Arolsen Archives, and I've done a data type of surname and given name, Saul Zachs. But be clear, there are other ways to search for what towns they were in, what religion they had, what was their, you can filter things on birth year, and you can search for certain text in any field that's available in the database. So there's lots of other ways and lots of other things to search for and to thin down your search. Like I could search for Saul Zachs, and maybe, you know, I could search for John Smith and find lots of John Smiths, but then I could also say, and search for him only in Bendin, Poland. More importantly is the search type that I want to go into. Whenever you do any one of these websites, they have the ability to refine your search, right? In the Arolsen Archives, there's a simple button that says include synonyms. So if it's off, it's like an is exactly match. If it's on, it'll include synonyms. Same thing with Ancestry.com, match all terms exactly or not. On JRI Poland, they're actually more sophisticated. They give you up to 4 different data types to search for and numerous different search types. There's is exactly, you can search for synonyms, you can search for phonetically, other ways that you can spell something that makes it sound. JRI Poland and Jewish Gen actually have a thing called fuzzy, fuzzier, and fuzziest. These are not silly names that I came up with. They're actually computer terms, real computer terms. What fuzzy means is it will allow you to swap any two letters. So if you or somebody entering the data 30 years ago made a typo and switched two letters accidentally, fuzzy would find it. So is exactly, if I typed in Zaks, Z-A-K-S, if I use is exactly, it would only find Z-A-K-S. If I did fuzzy, it would also find A-Z-K-S, or it would find Z-A-S-K. So two letters are swapped. Fuzzier is three letters being swapped. Fuzziest is any number of letters in any order, spaced in any way, right? And the point is as you increase the fuzziness or the synonyms or the phonetically, your searches get broader and broader and you get more and more results. So the thing that I strongly recommend and what I always do is on any initial search, I always start with is exactly. If you know the spelling of your parents' names or a relative's names, look for it is exactly. That will limit the search to be exactly the way you spelled it. You'll get the smallest number of hits. Sometimes you want to see if there's more. Sometimes you don't get anything, so you want to start expanding it. So then I'd move to synonyms and phonetically and on and on. Let's go through some examples of how this has helped me. For 3 years of researching, I was always trying to find information about my mother and found next to nothing. The only thing I ever found for her was ship manifests and her registration, excuse me, and her registration into the displaced persons camp. And literally just, I don't know, 6 months ago or so, I just was playing around and experimenting, and I decided to be a little creative, and I tried her nickname. And what I used was her Yiddish name. Here is actually a picture of her with a blouse that she had, where she has embroidered TZ for Tusha Zaks. That was her Yiddish name. So I went to the Arlson archives and I put in Tusha Goldstein. She was, that was her maiden name at the time. So I put in Tusha Goldstein and I did a search and I found absolutely nothing, right? Nothing for Tusha Goldstein. So I click include synonym and I find that they uncover Tushka Goldstein, spelled a little bit differently, T-U-S-Z-K-A. And when I open up this record and I see what it is, I can trace her ITS tracing number, and I can confirm that this is actually her. There's her name. She was in Lamberg, which is the German name for Low Poland, which is where she grew up. And I find this document for the first time just about 5-6 months ago. This is a document that she filled out at a displaced persons camp in July of 1947, doing a search for her parents. She was looking to see if they could find her father, Moritz Goldstein, and her mother, Sarah Goldstein. This document that I found just 5-6 months ago is the very first document where I ever discovered my maternal grandparents' names. It was from this search, and by using include synonym on her Yiddish name. So whenever you do these searches, sure, start with the name you know, but try and be creative, try and use nicknames, use the synonyms, use the other ways to search. And it's amazing how much you can continue to find. After 4 years of research, I'm still finding things. I want to move into a discussion about the internet and how different internet sites can interact. Excuse me a moment. And interact. So I've been using Arlson Archives quite a bit. Let's try another one, and we'll go to JRI Poland, Jewish Records Indexing. This has been an amazing site also. Very, very worthwhile for us. Now for this group, maybe all of us are interested mostly in Poland, so this is the one we'd go to. I still want to mention to anybody else or other family members that you may be searching for, JRI Poland concentrates on Jewish records in Poland. There are numerous other sites for every other country, right? You can go to Google and search for Jewish records in France or Jewish records in Czechoslovakia, and you can find equivalent sites to do similar searches. But just to show you how this works and what we can find, I went to JRI Poland, and I put in Saul Zaks, and I also added the town of Bendin, right, just to refine it a little bit. You can have up to 4, I mentioned earlier. And as I mentioned, I always start with is exactly. So when I go to JRI program, Poland, and I do Saul Zaks from Bendin is exactly, and I hit the search button, I get the results of exactly what you see on the screen. Absolutely nothing. Okay, so that didn't work. So I start expanding it. I'm really confident about the Zaks, but I change Saul to phonetically and Bendin to phonetically. I do another search, and JRI Poland brings me up this. This is the 1939 census of Bendin, Poland. So this was the census of people in Bendin at the time the war started. And here is my entire immediate family. Herschel Zaks is my grandfather. Gitla Zaks is my grandmother. Shaya Zaks is my uncle, who I knew growing up throughout my life. He was one of the founders of FOBS many years ago. Many people, I'm sure, in this audience knows about Shaya Zaks. And here's my father, Saul Zaks. You'll notice that because I changed Saul, I spelled it S-A-U-L, my American spelling, and I changed it to phonetically. I now wind up with S-Z-O-E-L, and I find it. And here is the younger brother, Shlomi, right? All the birthdays are correct. All the occupations are correct. So this is amazing. You know, just by sitting at home in my office, I was able to find the 1939 census of Bendin. But what's really amazing is it now has an address for the first time. And most of you probably know about Google. I'm sure everybody knows about Google. Most of you probably know about Google Maps. Maybe all of you know also that Google Maps has the ability to zoom in and look at street views. So from my home in my office, I can go to Google Maps and type in this address in Bendin, Poland, and I can actually view the home that my father lived in at the time the war started. Now, I was lucky enough that in October, November of 2019, my wife and I toured Poland and Germany. We went to Bendin. We went to all the concentration camps. I actually took a private tour of Bendin. I saw this house. I walked through this opening, and I went into the backyard, the courtyard, and actually saw the barns where my father told me stories about where he kept his horse and cart for the butcher business that he had. So, you know, granted, I saw it live. I was able to see it way before that just by sitting in my office and using Google Maps. You'll also notice that this JRI Poland on this display of the census has this button highlighted up here. Click here for more details. Now, I don't know what this is, but I'm certainly going to click it and see what happens. Again, all of these companies work together, or at least many of them work together. Some of them are actually owned by Ancestry.com. So I actually click this button, and what it does is it brings me to jewishgen.org. Now, jewishgen.org, for this button, just gives me information about Bendin. So I start reading. Now, it gives me dozens and dozens of articles about Bendin. And this is no afternoon project. It literally took me weeks to go through all the documents. And I'm learning about what was life like in Bendin, Poland in the 20s and the 30s. And it was all very interesting reading. I'm certainly not going to lie and tell you that some of the articles I went through a little bit faster, and they were boring and really didn't add a lot to my story or to my understanding. But then I come to this article, and I see this picture of all these gentlemen in suits, this big organization, obviously, of people in suits. Now, I have one and only one picture of my paternal grandfather, Herschel Zaks, whose Yiddish name was Gershon Zaks. And I'm looking at this picture. You see how old it is. You see how grainy it is. You see how small the men are. But man, if I didn't know better, this guy in the upper left-hand corner, who's number 27, he sure looks like my grandfather. What's the probability of that? Well, you read further in this article, and you find a section where all of these men's names with their numbers are listed. And sure enough, number 27 is G. Zaks, Gershon Zaks. Further down in the article is a description of what's going on and what all these people are. All of these people are the managing committee of the Guild representatives of the Artisan Union back in 1937. So, and when I read the article in further detail, lower in this document, it actually talks about that my grandfather was an important guy and a member, leading member of the Butchers Guild. Again, reinforcing that I know he's a butcher, right? So he was not just a guy who owned a little butcher store. He was a pretty heavy-duty guy in Bendin, knew a lot of people, and was on the Artisans Guild and the Butchers Guild. Just amazing stuff. Just amazing information that you find. While we're on the topic of other internet sites, I want to talk a little bit about social media, and I broaden the term of social media not just to be Twitter and Facebook, but any way that you connect with other people on the internet. And I want to go into something about Jewish Gen. Jewish Gen is another website, very powerful, a lot of good information. But what I want to focus on this slide is one aspect of the Jewish Gen website that I have never seen anywhere else, which I just think is amazing. Jewish Gen has this website. You do jewishgen.org/JGFF, and it is the Jewish Gen Family Finder search, right? So again, it has the same type of searching capability: search on surnames, search on country, search on town, search on given name, exact, phonetically, and on and on. So I put in a surname of Zaks, and I'm going to keep it very broad for this example. And I'm just going to say Zaks in Poland, and I'm going to do the search. What this is going to do is not give me information about Zakses in Poland. The Family Finder does not give you information about Zakses in Poland. What it does is it gives you the list of every single person who's a part of jewishgen.org who has also searched for Zakses in Poland, right? So it doesn't give you the information that they found, or doesn't give you information about Zakses in Poland. It gives you the names of other people who've searched for Zakses in Poland, right? So here's this list of all Zakses, all Polands, the towns those Zakses were found in, when that data was last updated, and it gives you the name of all these people. Now, it doesn't give you their email address. They want to protect people's identities, right? So that you can't just harass them. But when you sign up for jewishgen.org, you put in information and you give them your email address. So in this case, I don't know who this A. David Kornbluh is and why he searched for Zakses in Poland, and I can't contact him directly via his email, but it gives you this button to click here. And when I click here, it opens up a window, and you can type a message just like any other mail message, and you can send it. And jewishgen.org will forward it to this David Kornbluh, and I can ask him, and I did, ask him, hey, who are you? I see on jewishgen.org that you searched for Zakses in Poland. May I ask why? Are you related to a Zaks? Maybe are you related to me? You know, what information did you find, right? I have used this at least over a dozen times. Every time I've sent out a mail requesting something, everybody's gotten back to me. I've been contacted a few times. I've always gotten back to people who contact me through this. Everybody who's doing this type of research to this level always wants to help everybody else. So I think this is just an amazing feature. I've never seen this before. I think it's great. However, I will say in full disclosure, it was interesting. I loved contacting different people and hearing different stories. In my particular case, it actually never did lead to anything. So I want to be honest about that, but I still think it's very worthwhile to work on this and to try and use this. The other thing I have to quickly mention, I'm sure you all know about the University of Southern California Shoah Foundation. This was the effort by Steven Spielberg after he did the movie Schindler's List to actually videotape and record survivors for all time. There are over 54,000 videos and testimonies. My Aunt Lily Zacks actually has one of these. You can actually go to the website and you can find everybody who's done an interview like this, although not all of them, in fact, I believe very few of them are actually available live that you can see online. You usually have to go to some facility to actually go view them, like the University of California. The nearest one in our area that I know you can go to access any of these is the Holocaust Memorial Museum down in Battery Park in Lower Manhattan. Once it opens up again. So you can get this, but it's an incredible wealth of information. And the other thing that I can't get through this slide without at least mentioning is the concept of Facebook. I'll offer the fact that I personally am not a big fan of Facebook, but I am on it. It has led to some interesting stories and some interesting experiences. I've joined, 3G groups. I've joined a group to make Holocaust education mandatory throughout the United States. And I post things once in a while. And a little side story that I have to mention, just to show you how these things can interact and the things you can find, is for Holocaust Remembrance Day about 2 or 3 years ago, I think about 2 years ago, I just decided to do something different, and I gathered a collage of all of the relatives' pictures that I had of people who perished in the war, people who were murdered in Auschwitz or other camps. And one of them was a picture of some twins of my father's uncle's first wife. You can draw that line in the head if you want. It almost doesn't make a difference to the story, but I published this picture of some twins that were distant in my family. About a day later, I get a message on Facebook from a woman. Turns out she's on Long Island, never heard of her before, never knew of her before. And she sends me a private message saying, hey, that picture of the 2 twins that you posted on your Facebook page, who are they? How do you have that picture? Who are you? Because I have the same picture, she writes. So we exchange a couple of messages, we exchange emails, we email each other for a while, we get on the phone. I remember I had to talk with her for like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And it turns out by me just posting this picture, her, if I get this right, her father's sister was married to my uncle, right? Back in Bendin, Poland before the war, and they had those twins. And that sister, her father's sister, and those twins were sent to Auschwitz and were murdered in Auschwitz. But now I connected with her and we heard stories and we shared some stories about Bendin. And, you know, it was just amazing, the things that you can do with social media. Another important thing that I want to go over, and this is very important, is to actually submit inquiries to these actual archives. You can do a tremendous amount of work and information and research directly from your home, sitting on your computer live, right, online. But you should know that Arlson Archives, as I mentioned earlier, it has over 30 million documents. And as of last year, the date that was like July of last year, only 27% of those documents have been scanned in and are available online. So there is a tremendous amount of information that's still available that you can't get to online just yet. But if you go to the Arlson Archives and you search for, search, explore inquiries and submit inquiry, you can find this page where you could submit an inquiry. The U.S. Holocaust Memorials Museum has the same thing. It's called Research and Individual, okay? And what they are is you fill out this form, right? Do you want a document on a person or a topic? Is it on myself or a family member? Is the target person a female or a male, or you don't know? What's their name? This scrolls off the page. It goes on and on. You provide as much or as little information that you have, and you submit it. So you click the button submit, and it goes off to the Arlson Archive, or this one goes to the Holocaust Memorial Museum. It will be assigned to someone who now has the vast multitude of information that is offline, for them to search and get back to you. So it's a way to really research and use these archives effectively. And I strongly suggest you, even if you're not into sitting at your computer and doing this online, just fill out this form and send it out and see what you get back. You'll be amazed. I got tons of information this way. The thing that I do want to forewarn you about is it can take months. These people are swamped. They are very busy. I think a lot of it is volunteer organizations. In the case of me sending away to the Gross Rosen archive and getting information back, it took 9 months, but they will eventually get back to you. And that also brings up the next concept that I quickly want to mention is these two sites, for Arrowson Archives and the U.S. Holocaust Museum, yes, they have this online capability to research an individual, but you can directly email the concentration camps themselves. I sent an email directly to the Auschwitz archive and to the Gross Rosen archive. Gross Rosen sent me back information. They also sent me back that information about 2 different prisoner numbers. So you can just email the archives directly and they'll get back to you. A very important concept that I have to reinforce to you is to read, and to read some more. You have to learn about the topics in order for you to piece together the entire set of information, in order for you to piece together the entire story. It's very time consuming, but it really needs to be done if you want to get everything that you can. Throughout all my life growing up with my father and through that 2-hour audio interview with my parents, you get facts, and I've always had facts. I've always known that he was in Blechheimer, Gross Rosen, he was in Buchenwald, he was in Dachau. I don't know which order he was in, which one he was in first, how he went from one to the other. I do know that he told me he was in Blechheimer first. I know he told me he was in Blechheimer for less than a year. I know that in Blechheimer is where he received his tattoo, from him telling me this. He also always talked about the fact that he was on 3 death marches, but I don't know where, I don't know between what concentration camps, I don't know when. These are all the facts I have. You start your research. Now, the rest of this slide gets a little busy. I'm not sure you can read it all, but I'll walk you through the salient points. So the first thing I do is I find a picture. I never knew the number on my father's arm. I grew up with it. How was I possibly supposed to memorize it? But I found an old picture of my father, scanned it into my computer, blew it up, and for the first time I can see that his number is 179085, tattooed on him. Through social media, I contacted a woman whose father was on the train from Bendin to Blechheimer, and she told me about a book, Auschwitz Chronicle. I got the book, I read the book, very interesting, a lot of information, but there was one paragraph in the book which changed everything for me. And it specifically, formally documented, right, that on April 1st, 1944, over 3,000 male prisoners arrived at Blechheimer and were given the tattoo numbers between this range. And if you subtract these 2 numbers, you find out it's exactly 3,056, right? My father's number, 179085, is in this range. So for the very first time, by reading this book and learning about Auschwitz and learning about Blechheimer, do I find that my father was sent from his selection into Blechheimer on April 1st. When I read more about Blechheimer and I read the history of Blechheimer, I find out that a lot of people were working on, all the men were doing slave labor on repairing railroad tracks, which my father told me. And that Blechheimer, as the Russian army approached in 45, as the Russian army was approaching from the east, Blechheimer was evacuated on a death march. And they left Blechheimer on January 21st, and that death march arrived in Gross Rosen on February 2nd. Further reading tells me, so first of all, they left Blechheimer on January 21st. I now know he arrived on April 1st of 44. That's about 10 months. My father always told me he was in Blechheimer for just under a year. So that fits, right? More reinforcement. In doing more reading about Blechheimer and research just about Blechheimer, I find that the death march out of Blechheimer, when Blechheimer was evacuated, I find the route of the death march, and it lists all of the towns that death march went through. On my trip with my wife in October, November of 2019, I rented a car. I went to Blechheimer, I toured Blechheimer, and then we drove this death march on that blue dotted line, all the way through each one of these towns to Gross Rosen. So can I be 100% sure that he was ever on any of the roads that we were on? No, I can't be 100% sure. But if you take this example of from Ucalazi to Nizer, it's all farmland and there is one almost straight road. So he was either on that road or a little to the left or a little to the right on the farmlands going between these towns. So I drove this and then I toured Gross Rosen. The thing that's interesting though is, so now the documentation in history books says that he arrived in Gross Rosen on February 2nd. And it also says that everyone on that death march from Blechheimer was in Gross Rosen for only 7 days before they were boarded onto cattle car trains and transported to Buchenwald. Well, if he arrived on February 2nd, and the documentation says that all those people were there for only 7 days, that means he would have left Gross Rosen and been transferred to Buchenwald on February 9th. Well, if you remember that other document, I've got proof from the concentration camps themselves that he left Gross Rosen on February 9th and arrived in Buchenwald on February 9th. Here's his entry into Buchenwald, where he got his new number, 124560, right? So all these numbers match, and the history books fill in the gaps of the death march, when it left, when it arrived, how long he stayed in Gross Rosen, and it matches the actual Nazi documentation I have on my father. So everything gets reinforced, everything gets proved. I've been talking a lot about Arlson Archives and a few other searches, a few other websites. I want to just make sure you understand that you can search for a lot more than just names. Even on Arlson Archives, we did the search function, but there's a browse archive capability, which lists dozens and dozens of different things that you can find. The blues all have little plus signs. When you click on the plus sign, it expands to have subcategories. So under incarceration documents, there's a whole set of categories of camps and ghettos. Under death marches, I can look up Nazi trails and I can look up death marches. So you can search for specific camps, ghettos, death marches. You can look up prisoner lists. You can look up sick lists, hospital lists. You can search information about towns. And every one of these websites has their own help guides and tips on how best to use them. Again, along with the Arlson Archives, there are dozens and dozens of other archives. Just going to Google, search for Holocaust archives or Holocaust archives for a specific country. You can look for specific concentration camp archives, all right? In this case, I went to Google and I typed in Buchenwald prisoner list, and I wind up with the Archive for the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, a Buchenwald archive, an archive called World War II Database, right? Museum of Family History, concentration camp inmate records. It never ends. There is so much work you can do, right, to try and find. It was through one of these websites that I found, that I searched, that I found this document. Remember, we're talking about the fact that he was sent from Gross Rosen to Buchenwald, right? Well, he arrived on February 9th, February 10th. Here on February 21st, I found another document, right? And there's a German title. I use my translation program that I talked to you about earlier to translate this. You feed this into that image program and it comes back with this title, means Addendum Change Report to the report of February 10th, that's the day after they arrived, listing 2,460 new additions from Gross Rosen. So this was like 10 days later, they did an update of everybody who arrived from Gross Rosen. And on page 2, I find my father, Saul Joseph Zaks. His number in Buchenwald is 124560. which matches his entry number, 124560. That's his Auschwitz number. Even that other document has 124560. So I find more and more reinforcement of when he arrived in Buchenwald and that he arrived from Gross Rosen. I want to take just a moment to go off the research for the Holocaust, because when you do all this Holocaust research, it's almost inevitable that you're not interested in your family genealogy and to go backwards in time and find out more information about your family itself, even outside of the Holocaust. And what I want to mention to you, it's important, is that when it comes to genealogy, every one of these towns has tons and tons of archives that literally go back hundreds of years. In the case of Bendin, I think, I'm not sure, but I think some of them are in Bendin, but I know a lot of them have been moved to a vault inside Katowice, a little ways away out of Bendin, but they're all stored there. Now, they're in these vaults, which are temperature controlled and humidity controlled. They're old documents that go back hundreds of years. There is never any plan to archive those and to scan those in and to make them available on the internet. It's just too much information. And they also have very limited access. You as a member of the public, I'm not even sure, without really special arrangements, if you can get into these archives, let alone they're protected, and you need to know how they're stored and how they're organized. There are companies that will search these local town archives for you, right? I hired a company out of Krakow that was recommended to me by Jeffrey Simbler. This company was absolutely amazing. I've got his information at the end of the slide. He was fantastic. He worked for about 6-7 months. The cost for months of work was about $300 US. I paid him over that time, and he sent me just dozens, plural, dozens and dozens and dozens of images of documents that he found. I showed you that I found the 1939 Bendin census on JRI Poland. That was data entered. He actually sent me images of the actual census. He sent me birth records for my father and his siblings, right? I actually hired him when I went on my own trip. I wasn't, due to personal circumstances, I wasn't able to join the trip to Poland that Jeffrey ran a few years ago. So my wife and I went on our own trip, and we hired this genealogist to give us a private tour of Bendin. And when we met up with him, he continued doing research on his own, and he brought this document. This was the grammar school enrollment of my Uncle Shia, right? When my Uncle Shia entered grammar school. So here's Uncle Shia's name, and here's my grandparents' name, Herschlich and Fridla, and a different address. So this shows me the first address they lived in Bendin, as well as the one on 85. So I actually visited both these addresses. And then he also took me to the Jewish cemetery outside of Bendin, where I was able to track down the tombstone of my great-great-grandfather and my great-grandfather. The genealogist gave me tons of information, wrote a 6-page document defining everybody and the tree. And he actually drew, this document is his document that he provided me from my father and mother and how it goes up the tree, backwards to 1780. So it was incredibly worthwhile. So in starting to close, I want to give some high-level concepts of things to keep in mind. The most important thing is this is not a weekend project. This research effort takes time. You have to have patience. You have to make it a long-term, part-time hobby. Another important concept here is, as I mentioned, only 27% of the Arleston archive is scanned in. So when you do your searches, maybe you'll find stuff, maybe you won't, but try again in 6 months, try again in a year. You never know what you'll find because stuff is being added all the time. I want to urge everybody to just start. I know it's an overwhelming process, but start literally anywhere with any piece of information. take a notepad and start writing down just the things you know, the names you want to search for, any stories you know, any towns that you know, any relatives of your parents that you want to talk to. Talk to other family members, talk to their friends, talk to their children and compare the stories. And as what happened to me with Facebook, talk to strangers and share common experiences. You'll be amazed what it can lead to. And if you're lucky enough, if it's possible, if you're in a good circumstance, I urge you to travel to these camps, visit Bendin, visit the concentration camps. I've seen pictures of Birkenau from now until doomsday. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's amazing. But you are overwhelmed when you stand in the middle of Birkenau and turn around and see how vast that killing machine was. What it must have been like to live in those barracks, to live on that property, to see the barbed wire and how huge it is. The size and the 4 different crematoriums that are now ruins, but you can see where they were and what their footprint was. It's an overwhelming experience, excuse me. So I urge you to travel and try and see these places. I finally want to beg everybody to please just do something, do anything. These stories need to be told, and they need to be told in any detail and in any format. Yes, I have a nice presentation. Don't worry about that. This is a book that I've prepared. It's just a loose leaf with all my notes. It's the full transcription of my 2-hour interview. That's 60 pages. It's got another 50 pages of all of the research that I've done. And this entire book is also on the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum if you look up my parents. But these stories have to be left for our children and for our grandchildren and for history. So that's it. I want to open it up to questions. I want to also mention to everybody that I have this research presentation as well as a detailed presentation on my specific parents' experience, right, of how they grew up in Poland, what it was like when they were selected, how they survived, and how they rebuilt their lives. I am always interested in doing this presentation for any groups, schools, synagogue, or churches. Please either give them my contact information or contact me and give me their information. I'm willing to take any questions offline as well as here. And what I want to finish with, I'll keep this up for just a moment, right, this is a little spreadsheet that I've put together of all of the most useful sites and what I got out of the sites and the actual website or contact information. I suggest you get your telephone and maybe take a picture of this. The blue text in the bottom is how on a Macintosh or on a Windows machine, how you can do a screen snapshot to save this information. I could use this for just a minute. I'll leave this up for just a minute or two, or if I take it down too quickly, just contact me from my email. But it has the name of the company, Polish Genealogy, and it's run by Jacob Zabrowski. He's the guy that I hired to do the genealogy research. That's their web address. All of these are free. The ones on top are all free, right? I've certainly given donations to them. Ancestry.com, you do have to pay for. And I hit these, the green ones are the orange ones are the email addresses for Auschwitz and Gross Rosen, how to just send them an email. And the ones on the bottom are those glossary of terms and the translation programs and the e-guide that I mentioned. So with these websites, you can really get a good start. And that's it. So I'll open it up. Everybody can unmute, and I guess Iris, you can ask me any questions that are in the chat.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you again, Jerry. This was incredibly comprehensive, as well as a clear labor of love that you really worked on. I think you made it really accessible for everyone. So a bunch of people put some questions and comments in the chat. I'm going to read them out loud, and you can still keep, asking questions and I can answer them. So I'll go in order of what we had. So Irene Rosen asked if, and some of them, Jerry, you answered during the chat, but I'll still ask them anyway if they might be helpful to remind people. So Irene Rosen asked if we'll be getting a presentation. And then Jeanette Cohen said, can we get the slideshow as well? So I'm putting those two together because they sound similar.
Well, if you email me at gmzax@gmail.com and ask, I can't mail that out because it's simply too big, so I can't mail it. I think we're going to take this presentation and put it on either YouTube or our webpage. I've been recording this. I hope that works. But certainly as far as the slide presentation goes itself, yeah, I can either put that on our webpage or email me and I can give you my Dropbox address and you can just take it.
I just put
and the cost won't be too much at all. No, only kidding, only kidding.
I just put Jerry's email address in the chat as well, so it's accessible for people right now too. Sam Silberstein asks, how do you find documents relating to non-survivors or who predate the Holocaust?
Well, that's interesting. I'm not 100% sure about what I'm about to say, but I'll give you my experience. Everybody always goes to Yad Vashem, and Yad Vashem, of course, is amazing, and I'm a supporter, and I've donated, and I've been there, and they also have all of the Shoah recordings. But when you go to their online database, it's only a victims database is what I always find. So there is where you can find information about people who've perished a lot, right? And I have not been able to find anything for my father or my uncle or my aunt or my mother in Yad Vashem because they were survivors. So Yad Vashem is clearly the first place to go. The other thing is, of course, all of the archives themselves, including the Arison Archive, because they will have information. There is some information. Remember, a lot of the people that, you know, debarked from the trains in Auschwitz, they were immediately sent to the chambers, and they were to the gas chambers and crematoriums, and they weren't documented at all. But Yad Vashem is where it starts for that.
Carol Weisfellner asked, do any documents show dates on them?
Oh, many of them do. Some, you know, many of the ones I showed in this presentation shows that it was stamped on February 9th when he left Gross Rosen, and the card went along with him to be stamped on February 9th when he entered Buchenwald. So you actually, and that's why I say that these documents at the concentration camps, the Nazi documents at the concentration camps, are the most valuable because they've got these timestamps on it. And they, you know that my father was there signing his name on that date. So yeah, those are the most valuable ones because most of them have some date on it.
Okay, and Cheryl Skura asks, who is also known as my mom, are there any records for DP camps?
Oh yes, DP camps have tremendous amount of records, and they're all on the Arison Archives. That's like the only thing I ever found for my mother, because when you registered at a DP camp after the war, they really made it a point to keep those documents around and to file them. So I've got tons of documents that I didn't show in this about my mother registering at the DP camp. I've got, when you registered at the DP camp, some DP camps you actually lived at, they provide barracks for you, or you could be off-site. So I actually have the DP registration for my mother and father, giving the address of where they lived in Stuttgart, Germany, and the DP camp they registered to was like a 20-minute drive northeast of them, because I know I have the name of the DP camp. So you can find out the address they lived at if they lived off-site. But all that information, DP camps have all that information. And I've got a ton of information of every request they made for reparations to the DP camp, and I've got every piece of documentation of them being turned down for reparations. So yes, that's a tremendous amount of information.
And Jeanette Cohen wants to know, does Arison include labor camps?
Oh, absolutely. All of the camps that my father was in were labor camps, were slave labor camps. Right, and my mother, you know, I didn't go into the story of my parents, but my mother was, she was also in Blechheimer for a little while, but she got transferred to Mulhausen-Matter working on rockets under Werner von Braun. And that was a slave labor camp. And then went to Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen. But there's documentation of her in Mulhausen-Matter.
Marilyn Pruce wants to know the name of the
Oh,
company
Marilyn
hired
Cruz.
to do your research.
I'm sorry, somebody was talking with their microphone on. Can you repeat that?
I said Marilyn Pruce asked the name of the company you hired to do the research in Poland.
The name of the company, it's in that slide at the end, which again, if you email me, I'll give you the detailed information. But the name of the company is Polish Genealogy, and go to their website. It's guide, G-U-I-D-E Poland.com, guide-poland.com. And you'll actually see a picture of the three guys that run the company. One of them is Jacob, who I worked with, and you can contact them through that. Great company.
Aton Gold asked if there are any Red Cross records.
I know there are. I've seen them in my travels type thing through the internet. Nothing actually appeared for my parents anywhere for any of that, but I do believe I know they exist.
Okay.
If you go to that e-guide, I know that there are samples of some Red Cross, registration things.
Okay, I think that's most of the questions. There were a bunch of comments as well. So, as we all know, that Jerry's information was to help us do this ourselves, and he wants to help us do them ourselves. But Jeff Singler is also a member, and he also said that he can help people, and he left his information in the chat as well if you want help from someone else. And everyone else just really, really said thank you, Jerry. This was an excellent presentation, super informative. I know I'm excited to do some research myself, and I'm sure everyone else is too. So.
Great. I hope it helps.
You're losing.
Oh, there's a cousin of mine, Nancy Lowell.
Someone's asking if you could show the slideshow again.
The last slide.
Is it visible now? No, I have to share. I'm sorry. Hold on. Let me share my screen again. Is that it? You got it?
Yep, it's there.
What
Okay.
about experimental camps?
Ow.
I don't have any specific information about whether it's or if they did experiments on people or not.
My aunt was in experimental camps.
They must be there, but I don't know exactly how you'd search for those. That never came up in my research. As I say, I'll be the first one to admit I don't sell myself as an expert. I've done this work, and I hope it helps people. But I know there's tons more stuff to know and learn.
Mm-hmm. My aunt was selected. Jewish women were selected for experimental camps, which the American government took all the information from. That's the first thing they did. They took all the scientists and brought them to the United States, and they have all the evidence or experimental, what they did on Jewish women in the war.
Yeah, I'm sure.
How do I find out information?
I'm just not sure. I mean, if you know exactly what camps they were in, I could help search for those camps. I apologize that I'm not going to lie, I just don't have an answer for that.
Well, most of those women could not have children after the experimental.
What? After the woman died, I know. Because they were.
Yeah, I don't know where we want to go from here. Is this?
Yeah, so you want to just unshare your screen, Jerry, so we could all see each other for a second. So again, if you have further questions, Jerry has provided his information. We're going to send a link to everybody after who's on this presentation with this video, so you can see it again, and we can provide Jerry your email address as well. Also, again, everybody, if you have more interest in getting more involved or learning more about the Fraternal Order of Bendin-Sosnowicer, you can email us at fobs18@gmail.com.
Silverstein.
I know.
So thank you all so much, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Take
Thank you
care,
so
Thank
much.
everyone.
you.
It's really informative. It was great.
It was great.
Wonderful, Jerry.
Thank you so much.
Sensational.
Wonderful presentation.
Thank you. You're very
One
welcome. I
up.
hope it helps.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Maybe
Thank you,
can,
Jerry.
I
Good
want to
job.
do great Iris and Jerry, and it's a great job, Irish.
Thank you very much.
And I also want to finish by thanking FOBS and everybody for giving me this opportunity to share it with everybody. Right. We all have to work to keep this memory alive.
Amen.
So thanks, everyone.
Man,
Thank
If
you.
anyone wishes, they can look at the chat, and I posted the email address of Fred Frankel, who will create family trees for people from Zagłębia. He works with JRI.
very good.
Oh, nice
Great.
information.
Great job, Iris. And in
And
the chat.
he did the majors back to 1759 in Bendin.
Wow.
That's some-
I think Iris did a great job too,
Yeah.
subjectively.
I think Cheryl, you should have nachas from Iris. Great
Thank
job.
you, I do.
And in the chat, I meant Iris, not Irish. So if you see great job, Irish, it's you.
Oh, okay.
And cousin Jerry, you're unbelievable. You're the man. You are the man.
For everybody else, you have to understand that's my first cousin, and I pay him to say these things.
I also think it's amazing there are two Jerry Zacks on this, because I was reading Jerry Zack said, "Great job, Jerry," and I was a little confused, and then I saw there are two. So
That's my other cousin, Alan's brother. He's Shia's son, and we were both named after our grandfather, Gershon Zacks.
Great job, Jer. Great
There
job.
he is. Thank
Great
you.
job. Oh, wonderful.
Hi, Jerry.
Hi, Al.
His nepotism.
Thank
Yeah, a
you.
little
Thank
bit.
you so much. Thank you so much. I took a
You're
lot
very
of notes.
welcome.
And
Okay, I'm going to turn it off now, I guess. Take care, everyone.
Thanks,
Stay well.
Jerry.
Thank
Thank
you.
It's great.
Zeigazund.
Zagazin.
Amen. Amen. Amen.